Our reading today is from the book of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was also invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn it did, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So it's the middle of the day, and Roger walks into his favorite bar. He walks right up to the bar, and he sees his favorite bartender. The bartender tells Roger that she's going to be at an event that he's hosting later in the week, that she's invited a bunch of her friends, and even though they didn't want to go at first, she bribed them with a champagne brunch afterwards, so she and her friends are all going to be there. Roger orders a drink, grabs it, and goes to sit down at a nearby table. Once he sits down, a man approaches him and asks if Roger lives in town. The man introduces himself and says that he's the dean of a law school, and he's thinking about moving to the area. Roger shares a little bit about what it's like to live there and encourages the man to make the move. Then they start talking about God and local church options. At the end of their conversation, the man asks Roger for his card. There's an older couple on the other side of Roger, and as Roger gets up, the older man gets out of his seat and walks over to him. He says, "I overheard some of your conversation about local churches and faith. I'm a scientist, and I'd love to get your card. I'd like to get a drink with you sometime and talk about some of the things that I overheard." Roger says, "Of course," and gives the man a card. On the other side of this elderly man, a woman gets up out of her seat. She walks over to Roger and says, "Can I talk to you?" Sensing that the woman needs to have a more private conversation, Roger leads her outside to the sidewalk right in front of the bar. And she proceeds to tell Roger that she's in the midst of a really awful breakup. She begins asking questions about faith and God. They talk for about 30 minutes outside the restaurant. And before she leaves, she asks Roger for his card. Roger's at the bar for about an hour total. And in that time, he's had 1 drink and 4 conversations about faith and God and the universe. He's handed out 3 cards, and he knows that he'll see the bartender and a group of her friends later in the week. When I started this story out with "a man walks into the bar," my guess is you were thinking that there's a punchline somewhere. And at this point, you're probably wondering what this joke is all about. Well, the joke in this joke is that it isn't a joke. This is actually a true story. And Roger's name isn't Roger. Roger is a man named Jerry Herships. He's a United Methodist pastor, and he serves a church in Aspen, Colorado. See, friends, Jerry knows something that Jesus knew too. Any ground can be holy, and church happens anywhere we're willing to engage with people. If we take a look at today's passage, there's something to notice about the fact that the first of the recorded miracles of Jesus happens at a party and there are booze. Jesus is in the middle of what is a very common social function. We've almost all been to weddings. He's at this party, enjoying the time with his friends and his family, and they're all hanging around the table, chatting, laughing, celebrating. He's in this space where life happens, and it's at this point in time that Jesus chooses to begin this revelation of who he is and what he's capable of. Many biblical scholars think that the bride or groom at this wedding was actually a relative of Mary, Jesus' mother. As the host family, running out of wine would have been incredibly embarrassing for the family. This would explain why Mary comes to Jesus and asks him to basically save the family from humiliation. Despite his grumbling, Jesus performs this miracle, turning the water into the wine, and the party continues, and it's a great time. The miracle of Jesus is done in the most common rhythm of communal life, a wedding. This is significant, I believe, particularly as we look into who we're called to be as the church in this next evolution of what faith community looks like. Jesus wasn't at the synagogue. He wasn't on some mountaintop. He wasn't in a retreat center. He wasn't away at camp. He was in this divine space of everyday life, and he turned ordinary water into extraordinary wine. The disciples were able to witness this miracle and believe because they were in the same room, sharing this space with Jesus. Don't miss this point. The first revelation of Jesus happens in the most ordinary place, around a table, with friends, at a celebration. What this means for us, I believe, is that we can sit in Starbucks and share coffee with another human being and talk about life and love and faith. And that space becomes holy ground, and that is church. It means when you're in the break room having lunch next to a coworker who shares with you that her husband has just asked for a divorce, and you pray with her and you invite her over to your house for dinner, that break room becomes holy ground, and you've just had church. And kids, when you refuse to join in with a group of kids making fun of the autistic boy in your math class, and instead you walk up to him and you walk with him to your next class, and maybe you have lunch with him later that day, that school hallway just became holy ground, and you had church. The thing is that Jesus doesn't turn the water into just any old wine. We aren't talking like Boda Box here, the wine that you buy in bulk. This is the good stuff. This is like the stuff in the center aisle of the liquor store that actually comes in a glass bottle and has a real cork. And the superior quality of this miraculous wine gets noticed. The master of the feast actually admits that most people serve the good wine first, and then once everyone's a little tipsy and doesn't know the difference, they pull out the Boda Box. The master of the feast says, but you have saved the good stuff for last. And friends, here's the main thing. That good stuff isn't wine. It's the good news of hope that is the person of Jesus. And this passage tells us that the miracle was the manifestation of the glory of Jesus, and when his friends saw it, they believed. Jesus is this good wine, and Jesus is the very fullest revelation to this world of who God is. God saves the best for last, and the last is Jesus. And what Jesus reveals to us is that God is good and merciful and joyful, gracious and loving to an extent that we cannot even imagine. And that Jesus, my friends, is who we are called to share with all people, in bars and at the bank, at a camp or in the grocery store, where we work, where we learn, and sometimes, if we're lucky, even in our churches. My friend Jerry ended his story with this reflection. I honestly don't know if people are still hungry for the church. I just don't know. But what I do know, whether they are a bartender, a working 40-something, a retired couple, or the dean of a law school, people are hungry for spiritual conversations. Is the church ready to make the shift? Or, at a minimum, offer a champagne brunch? My friends, would we be brave enough to allow God's Spirit to move in us in a way that makes every space holy ground? May it be so.